Morning after my grandfather's funeral, I sat in the rental car outside the bank and stared at my phone until the screen went dark. $51,240. Gone. The account balance was $12 and some change. $12. I remember thinking that wasn't even enough to fill my gas tank for the drive back to the airport. I remember thinking that very specific, very small, very stupid thought, gas money, because my brain couldn't hold the bigger number yet. $51,000 is a thing you have to approach slowly, the way you'd approach something that might bite you. So let me back up, because this didn't start at the bank. It started years before that, in the particular way that things in my family always started, quietly, with good intentions and no paperwork. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the oldest of 3 kids. My younger brother is 4 years behind me. My sister is 7. Our dad left when I was 9 and never really came back in any meaningful way. So my grandfather, my mother's father, was the one who showed up. He came to my volleyball games. He drove me to the SAT. He was the one sitting in the front row at my college graduation in his good blue blazer, crying before they even called my name. He was also the one who pulled me aside at that graduation, while everyone was still milling around taking pictures, and pressed an envelope into my hand. "Don't tell your mother," he said. "Not yet." Inside was a check for $8,000. I was 22. I had never seen that many zeros with my name on it. I cried a little in the car on the way home, which I would not admit to anyone. That money sat in a savings account while I finished my nursing degree. Then I got my first real job, ICU nurse at a hospital in Columbus, and I started adding to it. Not a lot at first, $100 here, $250 there. Whatever I could manage after rent and student loans and the general humiliation of entry-level adulthood. But I was consistent. I kept a spreadsheet. I named the savings account, which sounds embarrassing, but I think you have to make the goal feel real, so I called it Front Door because the first thing I wanted when I bought a house was a red front door. By the time I was 28, Front Door had grown to just over $51,000. 6 years of night shifts. 6 years of missed holidays and sore feet and eating machine sandwiches at 3 a.m. 6 years of telling myself it was worth it, that I was building something, that one day I would unlock a red door with my own key. I want you to hold that in your mind, because what comes next will make more sense if you understand what that number cost me. My grandfather got sick in February. It started as what everyone assumed was a bad chest cold, then became pneumonia, then became something more complicated that required words none of us could pronounce. He was 81. He had lived hard and well and without complaints, and when the doctors started talking about comfort care, he nodded like they'd told him something he already knew. He died on a Tuesday in March at 60:14 in the morning. I was on shift. I got the call from my mother between patients and sat in the supply closet for 4 minutes before I went back out to the floor. That's the job. You grieve in 4-minute increments and then you go back. We held a funeral in Dayton that weekend. I flew in Thursday night. My brother drove up from Cincinnati. My sister came with her husband and their 2 kids, and the house my grandparents had shared for 43 years was suddenly full of casserole dishes and people I hadn't seen since the last time someone died. My brother is 4 years younger than me and has always lived in that gap like it was a canyon, always slightly behind, always slightly resentful of it. When we were kids, I was the responsible one, which meant I was the one who got trusted with things and the one who got blamed when they went wrong. He was the one who got the extra patience, the second chances, the benefit of the doubt. I don't say this to be cruel. I say it because it's true, and because I spent years not saying it, and because not saying true things is how I ended up in that parking lot staring at $12. My brother had been having a hard year. That was the family's phrasing, a hard year. What it meant specifically was that he had lost his job in the fall, borrowed money from our mother in October, borrowed more in December, and had apparently also borrowed from a friend who was now less of a friend. I knew the broad strokes. My mother mentioned it in phone calls with the same tone she used to describe the weather. Just a fact of life, something happening, nothing to be done about it. I had offered to help once, back in January. I said I could lend him $2,000 if he needed it. Interest-free, no pressure on the timeline. He said he was fine. He said he didn't need charity from his sister. He said it the way people say things when they mean the opposite, but when I pushed, he pushed back harder, so I let it go. I let it go. I should remember that I let it go. The night before the funeral, my mother asked me to add my brother to my savings account. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us, everyone else asleep or pretending to be. She was washing the same coffee mug she'd already washed twice, and she said it without looking up. "I need you to add your brother to your account, just temporarily, just so he has some stability while he gets back on his feet." I said, "What do you mean, add him?" She said, "As a joint holder, so he has access." I stood there for a moment. I want to be precise about this. I stood there and felt the specific physical sensation in my stomach dropping, which is something I had always assumed was a figure of speech until that moment. I said no. I said it clearly and without apology, which is not something I had historically been able to do with my mother. I said I was sorry he was struggling. I said I loved him. I said there were other ways I could help that didn't involve handing him access to 6 years of my savings. I said all of this. My mother dried her hands on the dish towel and looked at me the way she has looked at me since I was about 7 years old. Like I was being difficult in a way that was specifically designed to exhaust her. "It's just access," she said, "not permission to spend it. He just needs to know there's a safety net." I said a safety net he can't reach isn't a safety net, it's just a net. She didn't laugh. We went to bed without resolving it, which in my family means the conversation isn't over. It's just been moved somewhere underground where it will grow without sunlight until it's too big to fit through a door. The funeral was on Saturday. My grandfather had asked for something simple, and what he got was simple and also extremely him. The church he'd attended for 50 years, the hymns he'd requested on a note he'd apparently given the pastor 2 years ago, a reception afterward in the fellowship hall with coffee and the lemon cake he'd liked from the bakery on 5th Street. My aunt gave a eulogy that made everyone laugh in the middle of crying, which is the only kind of eulogy worth hearing. I held it together through most of it. I held it together through the graveside service and the reception and the long afternoon of relatives eating and remembering. I held it together until I was washing dishes in my grandmother's kitchen and I found his coffee mug, the old one with the chip on the handle, the one he used every single morning, still in the cabinet, still where it always was, still waiting for him. I cried in the bathroom for a while. Not 4 minutes this time. Longer. That night, after most people had gone home, my brother came and found me on the back porch. I thought he was going to say something about our grandfather. I thought we were going to have the kind of conversation that grief sometimes produces, where people accidentally say true things to each other because the defenses are down. Instead, he sat down next to me and said, "Mom told me about the account." I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm not asking you to give me anything. I just need my name on it. 6 months, maybe 8. Just until I get something lined up." I said, "I already told Mom no." He said, "I know what you told Mom." He wasn't angry. That was the thing I wasn't prepared for. He sounded tired and a little ashamed and genuinely lost, and it was so much harder to hold the line against that than against anger. Anger I could answer. That tired shame got under my skin in a different way. We sat there for a while. The neighborhood was quiet. Someone down the block had a wind chime. I said I was sorry he was going through it. I said I really was. I said I would help him think through options, job leads, financial counseling, even a personal loan on terms we both agreed to in writing. I said I would do any of that. What I would not do, I said, was add his name to my account. He nodded slowly. He said, "Okay." He said he understood. He went inside, and I stayed on the porch a little longer, listening to the wind chime, telling myself I had done the right thing. I had done the right thing. I was so certain of it. I flew back to Columbus on Sunday. Monday I worked a 12-hour shift. Tuesday I worked another one. Wednesday I had off, and I slept until 10, which is a luxury I only allow myself in very specific emotional circumstances, and this qualified. Wednesday afternoon, I logged into my bank account to pay my electric bill. I want to describe what it's like to see a number that shouldn't be there. Not a low number, a different number entirely, like reaching into your pocket for your keys and finding someone else's keys. The shape of the thing is right, the size is wrong. Account balance, $12.43. I stared at it long enough that the page auto-refreshed. Still $12.43. I clicked into the transaction history. The withdrawals had happened over 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, while I was at the funeral. While I was on the plane, while I was walking the ICU floor checking vitals and reading charts and being a person who had $51,000 somewhere safe. There were 6 transactions, 3 wire transfers and 3 standard withdrawals, structured just below the federal reporting thresholds because someone, my brother, or my mother, or whoever had helped them understand how this worked, had been careful about it, careful enough that it was clearly planned, careful enough that accident was not a word that could be applied to any part of this. The last transaction was time-stamped Monday at 11:52 a.m. I had been on shift. I had been in room 14 adjusting a drip when my account was emptied for the 6th and final time. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. I didn't call my brother. I didn't call my mother. I didn't cry, which surprised me because I am someone who cries at movies, at commercials, in supply closets at 6 a.m. But there is apparently a category of bad ding that sits on the other side of tears, and this was in that category. What I felt was very quiet, and very clear, and very cold. I called the bank. Here's what I learned from the bank, and from the fraud specialist I spoke to for 45 minutes, and from the attorney I called the following morning. When you add someone as a joint account holder, they are a legal co-owner of the funds. Not a borrower, not a guest, an owner. What my brother had done was not, technically, theft in the traditional sense, because his name was on the account. What it was, legally, was complicated. What it was, personally, was not complicated at all. I'd never added him to the account. I had said no explicitly twice. But my mother was also on the account. I had added her 3 years ago, during a health scare, when I thought having someone with access made sense. I had never removed her name. She was still there, as a joint holder, and she had the ability to add another joint holder, which is apparently a thing joint account holders can do at certain banks under certain conditions, and my bank was one of those banks. And she had done it while I was standing at my grandfather's graveside listening to the pastor say words about peace. My mother had added my brother to my account on Saturday morning, approximately 2 hours before the funeral began. I sat with that for a long time. She had stood in her father's church in the front pew and cried for him. And 2 hours before that, she had opened an account I trusted her with and handed my brother the key. I called her that Thursday night. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was expecting it. I said, "You need to explain this to me." She said, "Honey, I know you're upset." I said, "Please don't do that. Please just tell me what happened." There was a pause. Then she said, "He needed it. He's been drowning and no one will help him, and I couldn't watch it anymore. The money is still in the family. It's not gone." I said, "It's gone from me." She said, "You're young. You can rebuild this." That sentence. I want to sit with that sentence for a moment because it's doing a lot of work. You're young. You can rebuild this. It has the shape of comfort. It sounds like something a person says because they believe the other person will be okay. But underneath it is something else. The assumption that my years don't count, that my night shifts don't count, that the thing I built has less value than the thing she wanted to give away. It's the sentence you say when you've already decided someone else's need is more important than your sacrifice, and you want them to ratify that decision without complaint. I did not ratify it. I said, "I need you to understand that what you did was illegal. I'm not using that word for drama and using it because I spoke to an attorney yesterday and that is the word she used." My mother was quiet. I said, "I'm not going to tell you what I decide to do yet, but I need you to know that I'm deciding. I'm not just absorbing this." I hung up. I sat in my apartment in the dark for a while. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Normal sounds of a Wednesday night. I thought about what my grandfather would have said. He was a practical man. He would have said, "Figure out what you can fix and fix it. Don't spend your energy on what you can't." I thought about the $8,000 he gave me at graduation. I thought about him in the front row in his good blue blazer. I thought about the coffee mug with the chip on the handle, still in the cabinet, still waiting. Here's what I did. I filed a report with the bank's fraud department, citing the unauthorized addition of a joint holder by an existing account member, a process my attorney described as unusual but not unprecedented, with an outcome she described as uncertain but worth pursuing. The bank opened an investigation. That process took 11 weeks. At the end of it, They recovered $14,000 through a reversal process I still don't entirely understand, and the rest was unrecoverable because my brother had moved it quickly through accounts the bank couldn't reach. I filed a civil claim. That is still ongoing as of when I'm telling you this. I won't know the outcome for a while. I removed my mother from my account. I opened a new account at a different bank, one where my family has no history, no familiarity, no access point. I gave that account no name. I decided I didn't need to make it feel like a dream to protect it. My brother called me twice in April. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message was defensive and circular. The second was an apology, or something shaped like one. The kind that explains so much context around the wrong thing that by the end, you're not sure who did what to whom. I listened to both. I haven't called back. My mother and I have spoken 3 times since that Thursday call. We talk about neutral things. The weather. My grandmother's health. My sister's kids. There's a conversation underneath all of those conversations that hasn't happened yet, and I'm not sure when it will, or what I'll say when it does. I'm still figuring out how to hold being someone's daughter and being someone who was wronged by that someone at the same time. It turns out those 2 things can coexist without resolving. I'm learning to live in that space. I work the early shift now by choice. I'm at the hospital by 5. The hallways are quiet at that hour. Different from daytime quiet, not empty but settled, like the building is still deciding what kind of day it's going to be. I like the way the light comes in through the windows at the east end of the floor around 5:30. I like the handoff notes from the night team. I like that the coffee in the break room is always fresh at 5 because someone who has been there all night made it, and I know how that feels. I am rebuilding the account. It's slower this time because I know more about how quickly a number can disappear, and knowing that makes it harder to watch the balance grow without flinching a little. But I'm doing it. I have not put a name on the account yet. I'm not ready to name it, but I know what I want. I have always known what I want, and I think wanting it clearly and protecting it carefully is enough for now. You don't have to have the door yet to know exactly what color you paint it. I used to think that being the responsible one was just who I was. The daughter who handled things, the one you could count on, the one who would absorb what needed absorbing, who would bend so that no one else had to break. I thought that was love. I think I confuse love with load-bearing. The thing about being load-bearing is that no one asks whether you're okay with it. It just gets assumed, and if you carry it long enough, you start to assume it too. You stop asking yourself what you want because the answer feels irrelevant to what's needed. I am practicing asking myself what I want. I want a house. I want a front door I can paint whatever color I choose. I want to sit on a porch of my own on a quiet night and not be waiting for the next thing to carry. And I want you to hear this part because I think it's the part that matters most. I did not do anything wrong. I know that sounds obvious. I know it should feel obvious. But when the people who are supposed to protect you are the people who hurt you, there's a way your brain tries to negotiate with that. Tries to find the version of events where you were also partly responsible, where if you had just been different, or smarter, or less trusting, none of this would have happened. Your brain does that because it is more comfortable to believe you had some control than to accept that someone you loved simply decided your sacrifice was acceptable. You didn't do anything wrong. If you've been the responsible one, the one who holds things together, the one who bends, that is not a character flaw that invited harm. That is a role you were handed so young you forgot it was a role. You are allowed to put it down. You are allowed to stop catching everything that falls. You are allowed to build something quietly, carefully, behind whatever door you choose, that belongs entirely to you, and to keep it that way. There's a specific kind of silence that comes after you've been betrayed by someone you love. Not the silence of a quiet room. The silence of realizing the version of that person you believed in doesn't exist the way you thought it did. I sat in my apartment on that Wednesday night and felt that silence the way you feel a temperature drop. All at once, everywhere. Impossible to ignore. I keep coming back to the choices that led here. Not my choices, though I've examined those too, and I'll get to that, but my mother's. My brother's. The sequence of decisions that had to be made, one after another, for this to happen. Someone had to look at 6 years of my savings and decide it was available. Someone had to structure the withdrawals carefully enough to stay below federal reporting thresholds. Someone had to know on the morning of my grandfather's funeral what they were doing and do it anyway. That level of deliberate action has consequences. Not because the universe is keeping score in some cosmic ledger, but because choices shape the people who make them and the people around them and the trust that either holds a family together or quietly dissolves it. My mother made a choice. She is living in the shape of that choice now. So am I. What I've learned, and I mean actually learned in the way that costs something, is that being trustworthy and being trusted are not the same thing, and that I had confused them for most of my adult life. I was trustworthy, I kept my word, I showed up, I'd built carefully and quietly. But I extended trust without examining whether it had been earned, because family felt like it should be exempt from that kind of audit. That was not a moral failure on my part. It was a gap in my understanding of how the world actually works, and closing that gap has made me someone different. More precise about who gets access to what I built. Less willing to let love function as a reason to waive accountability. The part I'm still working on is the resilience piece. Not the external kind, not just rebuilding the account balance, though I'm doing that too, but the internal kind. The discipline of continuing to be someone who builds things carefully even after you've watched careful building get dismantled in 72 hours. It would be easier to stop trying, to keep money in a checking account and spend it before anyone else can. To decide that hope is just a liability. I have had that thought. I have sat with it seriously. And I have decided, deliberately, that I will not let what happened to me become the ceiling of what I believe is possible for me. My grandfather saved that $8,000 for me over years I wasn't watching. He pressed it into my hand and said, "Don't tell your mother yet," and I thought he was being sentimental. I think now he understood something about the dynamics of that family that he was too kind to say directly. He gave me a foundation and trusted me to build on it. I am still building. It is slower now. It is more protected now. But I am still building. You are allowed to be both heartbroken and clear-eyed at the same time. You are allowed to grieve a relationship and still make an honest assessment of what it is. You are allowed to rebuild slowly, without rushing toward forgiveness you haven't actually found yet, without performing a recovery you haven't actually finished. Build it anyway, behind whatever door you choose, with whatever you have left. That's enough to start.